Touma Kamijyo is a clumsy and lazy high schooler living in Academy City, a scientifically advanced city in Japan run by an advanced supercomputer called the Tree Diagram. Here, 80% of the population are students who have developed psychic abilities and are called espers, ranked from level 1 to 5. However, Tuma is just a regular guy who is still at level 0 and has no fancy powers, but somehow always finds himself plagued with misfortune. One evening, Tuma goes to a regular restaurant where he sees a guy harassing another girl who is sitting alone. He tries to butt in and play the hero, which ends up annoying the guy and his delinquent buddies, who immediately start chasing him around town. The weird thing is that he was actually trying to protect the guys from the girl, but they have no idea of his intentions. After running for a while, he finds out that the delinquents are no longer chasing him, so he takes a quick stop at a bridge to catch his breath. The bully's name is Misaka, and she catches up with him shortly after, only to reveal how she made the delinquents pay for trying to mess with her by frying their nervous system using her esper ability. Tuma knows the girl is a level 5 esper, one of the few in the city, and when she begins flexing her powers, he realizes he shouldn't have butted into her business. He tells her that he is also level 0 esper, just like the delinquents, and states how unnecessary it will be to show off her powers because she might end up killing him. She uses a coin to channel her electric ability, and the result is a railgun blast that's supposed to drill a hole in his chest, along with everything on its path. However, he somehow manages to block the attack, making her so pissed that she sucks in the electricity from the entire district and blasts the environment with it. The next morning, Tuma wakes up to extremely hot weather, with no AC to cool off thanks to last night's attack that ended up frying his appliances. The day begins terribly, as not only has the perishables in his refrigerator gone bad, he also breaks his debit card before receiving a call from his teacher reminding him he must take summer lessons. He decides to air his futon on the balcony, where he is faced with the biggest shocker when he finds a strange little girl dangling on the rail who is dressed like a nun and looks like a foreigner. She wakes up and tells him she's hungry, but Tuma is still shocked that a girl is dangling on his balcony early in the morning. The only thing in her head is food, so she continues begging him to feed her before she dies of starvation. He decides to shut her up by giving her the spoiled hot dog he previously stepped on, but his mischievous attitude is rewarded with a bite on the hand. He also gives her the spoiled vegetables left in the fridge to further piss her off, but she happily eats, thanking him for being kind and generous to her. Tuma is suddenly overwhelmed by guilt, so he takes the plate from her and munches on a part of the food to save his honor. After the meal, she introduces herself as Index while explaining that she was being pursued on the rooftop but fell down due to exhaustion. Tuma finds her name extremely weird, leaving her to suggest that he could call her Dedicatus 545, which is her magical name. She goes on to explain that she was being pursued because she possesses 103,000 grimoires that hold great magical powers. Tuma notes that there's no book around her, so she explains that they are invisible, but he shouldn't be alarmed because his inability to see them has nothing to do with him being dumb. She tells him that she's being pursued by the elite magical society to which she once belonged, but he does not believe her because they live in a society of espers created by science, in which magic is an abstract term considered a fairy tale. When she insists that magic exists, he asks her to show him proof, to which she responds that she doesn't have enough mana to cast a spell. He chooses to ignore the situation because he also has a strange ability in his right hand that allows him to repel any type of attack, regardless of its strength. They get into a heated argument because both parties appear to have abilities that they are unable to demonstrate for some reason. Index tells him her robe is magically enchanted. She brings out a cooking knife and asks him to stab her with it. She instructs him to either stab her or demonstrate his dispelling ability by using it on her robe. He gives it a try, and after a few seconds, the robe's magical enchantment is nullified completely. She gets mad at him even though the idea was hers, but more importantly, Tuma realizes that the magic ability she supposedly possesses might be related to espers, as well, since his powers of nullification work on it. He tells her she can stay over while he goes to school, but she declines, explaining that the evil organization will find her and destroy his building in the process. While he heads outside, he trips and crushes his phone, making Index comment that his right hand erases God's blessings as well as good luck, and that is the reason he is always faced with misfortune. Although she's done nothing but insult him since her arrival, he doesn't want her wandering around town with nowhere to sleep. She tells him she'll be fine, and once she gets outside, she can barely handle the automated vacuum cleaners and mistakes them for enemy robots. In school, the teacher happens to be a pink-haired midget who always teases Tuma for being dumb. He spaces out during her lessons and can only help but wonder if Index managed to escape to the church safely. In the evening, he encounters Misaka, whom he usually calls Shocker, a nickname that always makes her mad that she wants to fry his brains so badly, but instead, she accidentally fries the phones of people passing by. They continue bickering, and eventually the automated robots affected by her electric wave become offensive, and move to apprehend them for disrupting the peace of the neighborhood. He returns to his apartment only to find Index lying on the floor with grave injuries, and a red-haired magician named Stale Magnus reveals himself as the person chasing after Index. Style refers to Index as a tool, though he admits that he wasn't the one who injured her because they need her alive. He explains that his colleague only intended to limit her movement, but for some reason her robe, which is supposed to provide complete protection, was ineffective in blocking the attack. Style warns Tuma about the power of the grimoires inside her brain and its dangerous effect on ordinary people like him, when he decides to step up and protect the frail girl who is being pursued by shameless adults. He wants to protect her and the grimoires before they fall into the wrong hands, but Tuma doesn't believe him and attacks him with a weak punch. He immediately conjures a powerful flame from his cigarette and gathers it in his palm for a powerful attack. He blasts the intense flame at Tuma, and while it burns, he simply assumes he won't be able to survive the attack. Touma comes out of the flames unscathed, rather glad that his power of nullification also works on magic attacks. Style fires another blast yet again to intently observe how Tuma manages to extinguish his flames so easily. He becomes so pissed that he summons a powerful flame demon called Innocentius, whose flames are so hot that the environment starts melting away after a few seconds. As usual, Tuma tries to nullify the essence of the attack, but this one is different as it is unaffected and also possesses a weapon and intelligence. When it strikes, he blocks with his right hand. Only then does he observe that although its hand of misfortune is working, the flame simply regenerates instantly after being cancelled out. Just then, Index suddenly opens her eyes and begins explaining that Innocentius cannot be extinguished unless the rune markings placed somewhere close to their location are destroyed. The way she talks makes Tuma question her identity, so she introduces herself yet again as the Grimoire Library of the Zeroth Church of England, whose main purpose is safeguarding the grimoires. Tuma barely escapes Style's next attack, which blasts him down the floor below, and here he notices the numerous runes placed everywhere and realizes he won't be able to pull them all. Innocentius continues to chase after him, making him fall down onto the parking lot, and fortunately for him, the runes restrict the spell's movement so it cannot pursue him further. He tries to call the cops, but he soon realizes he didn't have time to fix his phone after it broke earlier in the day. A part of him wants to run away. However, the thought of losing Index continues to play in his mind. The sprinklers are suddenly activated and Tuma comes out of the elevator thanking Stale for using papers to set up the runes, which ended up being soaked thanks to his spell burning through the building and activating the sprinkler system. It turns out Innocentius is still active because the papers are more durable than the regular types. When it attacks again, Tuma cancels the flames totally and reveals that even though the paper didn't fall off, the inks have been washed away by the water. With no source of flame whatsoever, Style becomes powerless, with no means of fighting back or blocking. After a while, the police arrive with lots of spectators, which include Misaka and her sister Kuroko, who is a member of the Judgment, an organization likened to be the student council of the Academy City. At the back of the building, Tuma asks Index if she has a spell that can be used to heal her, since they can't just walk to the hospital without an ID. She tells him he can't use the spell because he is an esper and magic was made for ordinary people who have nothing extraordinary going on for them. As a last result, he takes her to his teacher's house, who although looks like an innocent loli, but is actually a chain smoker and drunk who has no atom of self-awareness. The 15-minute countdown to the end of Index's life begins, so Tuma asks the teacher to listen to her instructions. She tells him to leave the room since his abilities will nullify recovery magic if the teacher can manage to pull it off, so he leaves the room and runs as far away as possible. Back in the room, Index asks Como the exact date and time, which she explains to her without looking at any clock or calendar. Index doesn't understand how she can tell the time without a clock, leading her to explain that she has an internal clock that is indeed very accurate. She then stands on her feet and draws a magic circle on the table using her blood as a medium. The talk of magic scares Como, making her suggest some first aid while Tuma goes to call for an ambulance. Index tells her that treatment from the hospital cannot heal her or restore her mana, and their only option is to perform the spell with her cooperation. To begin, some items in the room are placed on the table, and Index explains that she has to accurately follow her instructions, or the spell may result in her death. They both start chanting a spell that makes the rune tremble for a while, then it suddenly stops, which indicates the rune has been successfully linked to the table. Index instructs her to conjure the image of an angel from her mind, as this is what will manifest in the rune to enable their spell. She succeeds, and although an angel appears at first, it disappears shortly after because Como was distracted by its illuminating physical form. They decide to give it another go by concentrating deeply on summoning the angel, which eventually appears to heal her wounds and replenish her mana. Immediately after the spell is complete, Index's automated response is shut down, making her return to her usual self. The next day, Tuma arrives at the apartment to meet the two shorties, who are getting along fine. When she asks what their relationship is, Tuma tells her that they are siblings, a lie that is so obvious because their hair and eye colors are completely different from each other. She reveals that she has to report what happened to the authorities because they might be doing something dangerous, but Tuma tells her not to interfere as he doesn't want to drag her into their fight with the dangerous magicians. She decides to put a hold on the conversation and go shopping for breakfast, leaving the two alone in the apartment. Index reveals that they mustn't involve Como further because grimoires are very dangerous, and she was barely able to handle a previous recovery spell. She explains that she belongs to the English Purist Church in England and was in a special division that researched magic so that they could carry out witch hunts and inquisitions around the country. The division gathered several original magical grimoires that can't be destroyed and sealed them in her head in hopes that they could one day use the powers to eradicate magic from the world entirely. In the evening, Tuma asks her about her time in England, but she tells him she doesn't remember much as her memories keep disappearing and only important info like her name is left. As they walk on, Tuma is suddenly isolated from Index and everyone around them, including vehicles and trains, disappears. A mage called Kanzaki Kaori shows up out of the blue and tells him the isolation is an effect of her rune. She goes straight to the point, telling him that she doesn't want to reveal her magic name and that he should just hand Index over without a fight and save himself. When he refuses, she threatens him by showing the extent of her powers, but still Tuma stands his ground even though he can barely move a muscle out of fear. Once again, she displays a frightening technique that can kill a person 7 times over within a split second. She thinks this will be enough to deter him, but Tuma is confident in his right hand. She then tells him that his abilities are useless and he should give up as he wouldn't be able to see the attack, let alone touch it. Each time he tries to approach her, the attack sends him flying before he can react to it, and after a while, he notices that there are tiny wires attached to her katana, which has been the tool for her attacks all these while. It turns out she hasn't even used her magic powers because she has a conviction that it is unnecessary. By this time, Tuma can barely see while he continues to stand against Kaori and her request. She tries to knock him out with the back of her sword and then stomps his chest, while she urges him to surrender before she uses an extreme method. Tuma notices that she still hasn't killed him, so he tries to reach into the human part of her soul by making her feel guilty for chasing after a harmless little girl around the country for months. She tells him that she isn't doing it because she wants to, but because the Purist Church they both belong to demanded it from her. She explains that she is actually a friend of Index, and the reason for the misunderstanding is because she possesses an ability called perfect memorization that lets her memorize every detail she can see. From the number of leaves on a tree to the shape of raindrops, she remembers them all, and as a result her brain becomes filled to its maximum capacity. Since 85% of her brain is already allocated to memorizing the 103,000 grimoires, she only has 15% of her brain to store regular information, which has to be constantly erased on a certain day each year or else she would die. She adds that their desperate measures to secure Index are due to the fact that they have 3 days left to erase her memories. She once again demands that Tuma hand Index over to them for her own good, but unfortunately, he cares more about her feelings and accuses her of being a bad friend to Index. This makes her mad because it took so much courage and resolve for them to hunt their friend, and now a stranger like him assumes they are evil because they want to save her from self-destruction. She beats the crap out of Tuma while explaining how they tried to help Index create memories that she kept losing every year, and after a while, they couldn't watch her lose the memories of them consistently and decided not to be a part of it anymore. All of her words fall on deaf ears as Tuma thinks her words have no value. However, he doesn't have the energy to fight anymore and falls unconscious. He wakes up to find Index beside him. His wounds have been treated, and when he asks how long he was unconscious, she tells him he was out for 3 days. This makes him surprised that Index still has her memories, and he can't help but wonder why the magicians left him on the road after he was defeated. He decides not to let it bother him, and while they goof around, Como comes into the apartment with Style and Cory following behind. Seeing that Tuma is gravely injured, Index begs them not to harm him, promising to willingly do whatever they want her to do. They reveal that they have 12 hours left until the time limit for the ritual is reached, and they want to observe what will happen until the time limit is reached, but they shouldn't try to escape. Later in the evening, Tuma receives a call from Kaori. She tells him that they plan to carry out the ritual by midnight, and he should use the remaining time to bid her farewell before they arrive. Tuma suggests they find a loophole in the situation by utilizing a spell from Index of Grimoires. She tells him that it's impossible because the church has taken measures against that, and even the magicians of the division cannot interfere with her condition. He also suggests that they could look for an esper that can control the memories of others and use it to wipe away the grimoires in her brain. While this sounds like a good plan, Kaori tells him she won't place her bet on something that might be risky. She tells him to do it on his own while they prepare for the ritual at midnight. Once the call ends, he starts calling random hospitals hoping to get through to a neurosurgeon who can perform surgery on her. After numerous unanswered calls, a doctor finally picks up the phone. Unfortunately, he doesn't have enough time to explain the situation properly because the time limit has already reached midnight. Style and Kaori arrive shortly after to find Index fighting through the pain and barely hanging on to life. Tuma still tries to convince them to seek help from a neurosurgeon, but this only makes Steele mad because he is suggesting they bet her life on a stranger who might end up toying with her body. He shows Tuma the magical artifact they plan to use to erase her memories and asks him to go ahead and dispel the enchantment on it if he is confident he has a means of saving her and securing her safety. He finally gives up on saving Index through a risky method, leaving the duo to begin their preparation for the ritual while he sits down and wallows in despair. They decide to leave the room and give him 10 minutes to bid her farewell before the ritual takes place. When they leave, he promises to get stronger so that he'll be capable of protecting her in the future, and in the moment, he suddenly realizes something fishy, so he calls Como and asks what she knows about the condition called perfect memorization. Como explains all the concepts and theories behind it, including the fact that the brain cannot blow up and shut down no matter the amount of memory inputted into it. This makes him realize that the church lied to Kaori and Steele, and the reason why Index's memory has to be erased every year must be as a result of a spell, rather than her brain reaching its maximum storage capacity. Randy inspects some parts of her body until he finds a mark at the top of her mouth. When he makes contact with it, there's a negative reaction that makes her incredibly aggressive, which makes her switch to her automated mode and brand Tuma as an intruder that is to be immediately eliminated. She begins casting a spell called Street George's Sanctuary, which creates a barrier between her and Tuma to ensure he doesn't break the 2 remaining seals in her body. She then blasts Tuma with a potent ray of pure magic, shocking the magicians who had been led to believe by the church that she was incapable of using magic. Tuma tells them the church lied to them concerning her ability to use magic as well as the Windows XP storage capacity of her brain. At this point, Tuma can barely handle the increasing intensity of the magic, so Style decides to assist him by sticking his runes around the room. Tuma tells them to firm their resolve if they really want to save Index, because once they join him, they have to give their all, even if it means dying in the process. With that said, Kaori uses a spell to displace Index's footing, changing the trajectory of the beam towards the sky. The beam is so strong that it destroys a satellite in space, making Kaori realize that the attack is called Dragon's Breath, a spell that is supposed to wipe away a person's existence with a single contact. Index regains her footing and fires the attack at Tuma once again. This time, however, he is shielded by Steele's Innocentius spell, which gives him an opening to close the distance between him and Index. While he runs towards her, she upgrades the spell to a higher level that easily defeats Steele's Innocentius. Tuma manages to make contact with the second seal, and this action also dispels the barrier around her in the process. Her automation shuts off and she collapses immediately, followed by Tuma, who had already reached his limit a long time ago. The next day at the hospital, Index reads a letter from Steele addressed to Tuma, which explains that both the church and themselves have decided to observe her from a distance for the time being, but they will certainly come back to retrieve her in due time. When she checks up on him in his room, she finds out that his memory was destroyed as a result of his exposure to the Dragon's Breath spell. He doesn't remember her, where he lives, the magicians, or his name, which makes her start crying because she is to blame for everything that happened. But then Tuma starts laughing and tells her he was just teasing her to see her reaction. He explains that his brain cells actually got destroyed by magic and he simply fixed it with the power of his right hand, which the doctor named Imagine Breaker. Index breathes a sigh of relief and leaves the room angry because his jokes went too far. The doctor arrives shortly after, and we learn that Tuma actually lost his memories and he was only quoting what Kaori told him so that Index doesn't feel bad and blame herself for his condition. 2 weeks later, Tuma and Index continue living together even though he doesn't have any memories of their previous relationship. He has been hiding his memory loss from her for the past 2 weeks, and when he stumbles on 2 guys who are apparently his classmates, he tries his best to play along with their dry jokes. As a result, he makes Index angry and ends up having to treat everyone to lunch in a restaurant. While inside, they stumble on a lady in distress who claims to have spent all her money and is in dire need of assistance. It turns out she doesn't have enough money to board a train home, leading Tuma to suggest that she simply borrow from someone. She then turns her attention to him, asking him to lend her 100 yen to make up for her train ticket, to which he refuses, so she tries again and asks him to consider it payment for her having the pleasure of looking at her beautiful face. The girl reveals that she is a magician, making Index curious about her affiliation, origin, and why she is dressed like a shrine maiden. The girl doesn't have any reasonable response and simply agrees to everything Index says like an emotionless person. Just then, some men in suits whom she refers to as her cram school teachers give her some money and escort her out of the restaurant afterward. On their way home, Index finds an abandoned cat and wants to keep it, but Tuma blatantly refuses because pets are not allowed in the school dormitories. While she yells, urging him to reconsider, the cat is scared away due to the noise, so she proceeds to search for it. She decides to investigate a strange mana flow that a rune close to where they are is causing and leaves Tuma behind for his own protection. However, this backfires as the room was set up by Kaori, so that Style could have a moment with Tuma in private. Although Tuma doesn't recognize Style when he is attacked with magic, he instinctively knows to defend himself with his right hand. After the exchange, he explains to Tuma that there's a girl imprisoned in Misawa Cram School, which was formerly a religious cult, but has now been taken over by an alchemist from the Zurich school. While he explains, he notices that Tuma has been calm and finds it strange because he usually has something to say in these situations. Not wanting to reveal his memory loss, Tuma finds a suitable excuse and urges him to continue with his explanation. He reveals the alchemist's name as Aureolus Izzard, and he is a robe practitioner whose aim is the deep blood, an ability that can kill a powerful entity known as a vampire, and he is after the girl in the cram school with that ability. The mention of something as absurd as a vampire makes Tuma doubt Styles' explanation is legit, so he adds that he doesn't have much information about the subject. However, the ideal course of action would be to rescue the girl being imprisoned in the cram school before the alchemist gets to her. He orders Tuma to accompany him to carry out the mission, to which he refuses, so he is reminded that Index would be taken away from him if he doesn't comply. Back at home, Index sneaks in the stray cat she already named Sphinx and uses her position as his sister to convince him to let her keep it. He tells her he has something to do outside and heads out with Style towards the location of the cram school. When they arrive, Tuma is given a picture of the imprisoned girl named Himigami Isa, who happens to be the entitled girl he met at the cafe earlier. Once inside, they find the corpse of a knight on one edge. However, the regular students carry on with their normal activities because there is a seal dividing the building into an outer natural side and an inner magical side. Since they are on the inside of the building, Style warns him not to touch anything because they are invisible to outsiders and cannot interact with their physical possessions. They take the stairs to the upper floors where they arrive in a cafe filled with students. The students meet them with cold gazes, making them realize that they are also on the inner side of the building just like them. They immediately begin chanting uniformly for an attack spell, which makes Steel flee while ordering Tuma to handle the attack with his right hand. Since there's no way for him to reach all the attacks at once, he also flees the scene and catches up with Stale, who explains that the spell is a replica of the one used by a group of monks. The remote spell soon traps them in the stairway, so Style uses him as bait while he makes an escape down the hallway. Tuma finds the girl leading the chant for the joint spell waiting for him and can only watch as she is severely wounded because of the backlash of the spell. When she collapses, he catches her before she falls down, and this allows the spell to merge and directly hit him. However, they suddenly stop and disperse into nothingness with the arrival of Asa. Asa informs him that she knows a lot about the blood flow in the body, so she can treat the injured girl if he assists her. It only takes her a few minutes to stitch up her skin, leading Tuma to ask if she is a secret doctor without a license. She tells him that she is a magician and brings out something that is supposedly a wand from her garment. Tuma tells her it's a police club and not a wand and asks her to leave the place with him. She tells him that there must be a misunderstanding because she isn't held against her will as he thinks. She explains that her blood attracts vampires and that allowed her to gather and kill the vampires. However, she doesn't want to kill anyone anymore, and the alchemist isn't the evil person Tuma thinks he is. He only wants to capture the vampires so that he can examine their powers and use them to save a person. While she explains, Aureolus shows up and begins toying with Tuma by distorting the space around them. When he moves to finish him off, Isa steps in, stating that if he continues to kill regular civilians, she will stop cooperating with him. Aureolus then stabs himself in the neck, then he uses his power of utterance to order Tuma to forget everything he saw in the building. Tuma opens his eyes only to find himself in a pack with Style and no memories of what transpired inside the building. Although they both know deep down that they might be forgetting something important, when Tuma touches his head with his right arm, his memories come flooding back. He tells Style to stick his tongue out so he can dispel the memory erasure done on him, and when he does, he punches him hard for using him as bait when they were trapped by the spell in the stairway. They immediately rush back to the building only to find the remaining knights chanting a spell that summons a powerful attack that destroys the massive building. As the building falls, it suddenly starts repairing itself thanks to Aureolus' power. At the side of the building, they find Sphinx wrapped in Index's scarf and realize that she has been captured by the mischievous alchemist. They immediately head into the building and begin searching room after room in search of Index and Aza. Style explains that Aureolus won't harm Index because she is someone he holds dear and wants to save. After a while, they find Aureolus, Aza, and Index in a room on the top floor of the building. It turns out Aureolus wants to save Index from the burden of the grimoires and the curse of having her memories wiped every year. In fact, the reason he went rogue was to search for a way to save Index, and he finally concluded that the only way to salvage her situation is to seek the help of the vampires by learning how they've been able to live so long despite having accumulated thousands of years' worth of memories. Style asks what he would do if their method of memory retention doesn't work on Index, so he tells him he'll have to make Index a vampire. They tell them that Touma already saved Index from her fate, and the reason he isn't aware of that development is because he has been hiding away in secrecy for the past 3 years. On hearing this, Aureolus can't fathom the thought that a worthless nobody like Touma, who is neither a magician nor an esper, was able to accomplish what he couldn't. He is told that Touma has an ability called Imagine Breaker, and he simply wasted years of his life on a matter that has already been resolved. Just then, Index begins mumbling in her sleep, saying she is hungry, and calling out Tuma's name at intervals. Although this is amusing to Touma and Stale, Aureolus gets pissed and makes them fall flat on the floor with this simple utterance. He moves to kill them, but Aza steps in once again, thinking she can reason with him like she did on the stairs earlier on, but this time he doesn't need her anymore and orders her to die using his power of utterance. Although she falls unconscious, Touma somehow uses his Imagine Breaker to nullify his magic before her heart stops beating entirely. By this time, Aureolus has become so pissed that he orders Touma to die by suffocating or by electric shock, but every single time he simply nullifies the essence of the spell at the right moment. After a while, he figures out the trick behind Tuma's right arm and conjures a gun that fires at a speed the human eye cannot possibly follow. Since his right hand can't reach what he cannot see, he conjures up some rifles loaded with the kind of bullet that'll make him experience maximum pain without actually killing him. While observing his childish use of his supposedly all-powerful alchemy, Style asks him why he needed Aza to lure the vampires when he could simply make them exist by uttering the word. To silence him, he makes him hang from the ceiling and skins him down to his bare muscles and blood vessels as punishment for mocking him. Next, he chops off Tuma's right hand, but instead of crying in pain, Touma approaches him while laughing like a maniac. Aureolus repeats the process and tries to chop off Tuma's head and other body parts several times, but every attack becomes inconsequential, rendering him powerless and frightened while he tries to pick up the needles that fell down. He becomes frightened of Touma, who reveals that since his power actually turns his thoughts into reality, it can no longer affect him because the power of Imagine Breaker has moved to every part of his body. But the truth is Touma simply messed with him psychologically, and he became so terrified of the Imagine Breaker ability that he used his powers on himself without even realizing it. Later on, Touma has his arm reattached in the hospital, and the doctor can't help but wonder how he managed to find himself in such a situation after recently having his brain cells fried. Stale also comes to check up on Touma. He tells him that Aureolus lost his memories as a result of the trauma, and they simply changed his physical appearance and let him leave like a normal human. On hearing this, Touma thinks he deserves more credit. However, Style isn't one to offer praise to people. Shortly after, Index and Issa come into the room, and here Issa thanks him for saving her life while revealing that Index has also taken her in without his consent. It's been 2 months since Tuma's fateful encounter with Index, and he is still taking makeup classes that were supposed to have ended the previous month. The reason for this is because he skipped school so many times that he had to deal with various issues like battling the magicians and saving Aiza from the alchemist. He heads to a vending machine where he slots in his last 2,000 yen note to get a drink, which, like everything else in the Academy City, is ridiculously expensive. Unfortunately for him, his money gets stuck in the machine, making him frustrated that he isn't able to get a cold drink in such hot weather. Just then, he encounters Mizaka, who gets pissed at again because he doesn't remember ever meeting her. She jogs his memory by electrocuting him, making him remember the feeling of experiencing a similar attack. After electrocuting him, she goes to the vending machine to get a drink, so Touma informs her that the machine eats people's money. However, she is well aware and reveals that she has a trick for making it spit out all the money it ate. Touma watches on as she kicks the machine like a delinquent while revealing her absurdly conspicuous shots in the process. He asks her why a rich girl like her always acts like a brute, so she tells him that her behavior is normal for a girl her age, and guys usually have a one-sided assumption on how girls act generally. When she learns that the machine ate his 2,000 yen note, she decides to help him get it back by using her esper powers. However, a lot of cans start popping out of the machine instead of his money. Tuma immediately runs away, making her the only person in the vicinity when the irregularity alarm goes off. She also escapes and brings along the drinks Tuma's money bought from the machine with her. Since it was his money, she hands him the cans and only takes one for herself because he didn't like the flavor. While they talk, she tells him to stop acting weak because he is the only student in the entire city that has ever managed to fight her, one of the 7 level 5 espers in the city, to a draw. Tuma doesn't believe he could actually defeat such a hot-headed girl and thinks she must be mistaking him for another person. Kuroko stumbles upon them having a conversation and immediately assumes she sneaked out of class to meet up with a man. She introduces herself to Tuma while requesting that he speak to her first if he ever wants to have a chance with her sister. The thought of Kuroko spreading the rumor that she's dating Tuma makes her attack her with her electricity. However, Kuroko can easily evade her attacks thanks to her teleportation powers. While they bicker, a girl who looks exactly like Mikasa shows up out of the blue. Misaka refers to her as her sister, but Tuma notices her speech pattern is incredibly weird. Misaka takes her supposed sister home, leaving Tuma to take the cans of drinks home alone. While he heads home, he trips on a ball and falls down along with the cans he stacked together. Before he can stand up, the weird Misaka shows up and offers to assist him in carrying the cans home. He asks where the real Misaka is, but she tells him that she came from a different direction and doesn't know what he's talking about. At the entrance of his apartment building, they encounter a girl named Meika, who is the stepsister of his next-door classmate and goes to a maid school. He feels bad for her because students in maid school don't have summer breaks. However, she has devoted her heart to her career path and is proud of her school's curriculum. At the entrance to his room, he finds Index and Isa squatting down as though they are doing something mysterious. When he asks what they are doing, they tell him that the cat is infested with fleas and they are getting them off him. Index shows him the herb she plans to use on the cat, while Isa reveals a magic spray she's confident would kill the fleas infesting the cat. Tuma remarks that it's dangerous to smoke the cat or spray chemicals directly on it. Weird Misaka volunteers to help by using a mild electric shock to kill the fleas infesting the cat in one go. However, she explains that she can't use her powers inside his room and suggests that he purchases a suitable insecticide. She drops the cans and leaves them alone to carry on with their evening activities as she walks away like someone who has completed her mission. The next day in class, Tuma doesn't pay attention, which makes his classmates tease him for being a level 0 esper. To encourage him, Komo tells him that he shouldn't give up because the third strongest esper in Academy City, which is Misaka, was once a level 1 before she fought her way up the ranks. After school, he encounters Misaka, who doesn't seem to be in her hot-headed state for some reason. She expresses to him her dislike for the city's supercomputer, the tree diagram, as well as the blimp that is always floating above the city like a surveillance vehicle. She realizes she is spilling too much information, so she hits him on the head and tells him to forget what she said as she goes her way. Tuma continues on his route home, only to encounter the weird Misaka, who is staring at the box of a stray cat. He thanks her for helping out the previous day, but she tells him she doesn't care much for his thanks. He notices that she was trying to feed the cat before he arrived, but ended up stopping halfway. He asks why she stops, so she informs him that she constantly emits a weak magnetic field that only animals can sense, hence she might end up harming the cat. She makes him help her pick up the cat, and while they look for a shelter for it, Tuma tells her to name the cat. She then names the cat dog, intentionally annoying Tuma, so he gives up and accepts the weird name she picked. They arrive at a bookstore where Tuma is supposed to pick up a reference book for school. He tosses the cat at her and she catches it without harming it. While he is inside shopping, a mysterious guy whose presence haunts her shows up behind her. The guy codenamed Accelerator chases her down an alley. She shoots him several times with a rifle, but the bullets simply bounce off him. As it happens, the guy can create a strong force field that repels or destroys anything that comes in contact with it. Misaka uses her electricity to counterattack. The result is the same because the attack is reflected back at her. He tells her that his abilities can reverse the flow of any attack that follows the principle of a vector, which means he is her natural enemy. At the same time, Tuma finishes from the bookstore only to find the cat alone at the entrance. They decide to look for Misaka by going around the building. He finds traces of blood, her shoes, and eventually Misaka's corpse laying lifeless in a corner. Killed, shortly afterward, the police arrive at the scene to have a look at the body. He leads them to the spot where she was killed, but they don't see any corpse. Still confused, Tuma starts running around each corner until he eventually finds weird Misaka holding a body bag over her shoulder. She tells him that she actually died in the alley, and when he asks who is in the body bag, she calls out the password and asks him to decode it. His inability to decode the password means that he isn't a part of the experiment, and so she cannot tell him who is in the bag. Just then, another Misaka shows up. Following her are more Misakas. They all share the same memories and explain that they are involved in a cloning experiment before apologizing for making him worry. The sight of so many clones around him makes him confused and frightened at the same time. They tell him that they are clones of Misaka made for military use, and after apologizing, they leave the cat in his care and exit the scene. Immediately after they leave, Tuma goes to the real Misaka's dormitory to ask her about the experiment. When he calls her room number, Kuroko picks up the call, and when she realizes that it's Tuma calling, she screams and calls him names. She explains that Misaka isn't around, but he can wait for her in the room. In the room, Tuma finds out Kuroko has a Misaka complex and somehow managed to move in with her despite being in a lower grade. While they converse, Kuroko notices the dorm supervisor has started her regular routine inspection. She tries to teleport Tuma away as quickly as possible, but her powers don't work on him. With no other option, she sticks him under the bed before the supervisor comes in. Here, he notices a big teddy, and in it is a zipper that contains the details of the cloning experiment Misaka is part of. In it, he learns that the clones were created to battle level 5 espers in an experiment that might let one of them break through to level 6, which has never been reached before. He quickly heads out to a power generation station, which is one of the areas marked on the map. He finds Misaka chilling under a nearby bridge and reads out the content of the documents he obtained from her dorm. In it, it states that the esper called Accelerator would have to kill 20,000 of her clones to break the limit to level 6. At first, she thinks he is simply pretending to care what happens to her or her clones, but she soon realizes Tuma is a genuinely kind person. She tells him the marked areas on the map are research facilities she has been destroying in order to halt the progress of the inhuman experiment. She explains that no matter how many facilities she destroyed, they simply created a new one and continued the experiment of achieving a level 6 esper. She tells him she plans to put an end to the experiment by defeating Accelerator, but Tuma knows he is too strong for her to handle on her own. He suggests that they both cooperate and defeat him together, which prompts her to inform him about her plan. She plans to intentionally lose to Accelerator, as that would mean the tree diagram overestimated her ability, and that would make them shut down the experiment. She resigns herself to dying if it means that the remaining 10,000 clones will be spared. She decides to go to Accelerator's position so that he can kill her, but then Tuma stands in her way, refusing to let her pass. She threatens to hit him with the full force of her powers in the hopes that it will be enough to deter him. Tuma reveals he has no plan to fight her and proves it by not moving an inch when she fires at him. Although she intentionally misses the first shot, she makes sure to hit him directly the second time. Tuma takes in the full force of her incredibly powerful attack, and even though he can barely stand, he still blocks her path towards a quick route to hell. She reveals that she has killed over 10,000 people and doesn't deserve to be stood up for because she is a villain. He tells her he went easy on him, and that is the only reason he is still standing after receiving countless blasts from her. She becomes fed up and charges a powerful blast that almost destroys the bridge in the process. That's it for this video. Make sure to like and subscribe for part 2, and watch this next video on screen.